because I'm old, so much so it is my birthday today, thank you very much. It takes me back to the days where people like Tony used to give me games. But actually, what it really takes me to is the moment when we stopped doing that and we changed over to having the OEM, the phone manufacturer, providing that balancer, and the Apple. And I think there's a changeover. I feel like there's a new wind in the air with the digital media apps, with the whole conversation we just had about consumer experiences. And yes, I am padding time because they wanted to switch things over. And that, I think, gives us a great opportunity to talk about what's happening in the world of web, and that's where Archie is going to tell us all about that. Archie, over to you, sir.
Awesome. Okay. I changed slides with this, I think. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Cool, so today we're going to talk about how to analyze your web stores as products. I think that's like the focus of this is, Stash is a business that builds player experiences. I think why I always say like payments is not our product, payments is our revenue model. Our product are direct consumer player experiences that will capture players' attention. So these are kind of the 4 pillars that make up Stash's approach. So the first one is exactly that like these player experiences need to be gameplay enhancing because they're higher friction. They need to be a better experience to get players to opt into them. The second is that in order to build those better experiences, you need something that's pretty bespoke and custom, and that templates and cookie cutters won't cut it. The third is that these experiences need to be unified. So, every experience and interface your player has to your game needs to be a unified experience in terms of accounts, segmentations, et cetera. And then the fourth and final is that, the developers we work with are big developers. They have tons of assets, capabilities they've built up in-house. We try and disrupt that as little as possible. First rule is do no harm, create no additional work. And then the second rule is how can you find the assets each studio has and maximize their impact in new formats like the web. So that's an introduction to Stash, but this talk will be really more about one way we think about web shops as products. And so kind of 2 lenses we take. One is metrics and the other is the user journey. So this will walk through the user journey looking at metrics, but the kind of holy of holy metrics for us is channel share. So what share of your spend are you getting through your first party channels? Why is this such an important metric? There's kind of 3 reasons. So the first is you can benchmark it. There's some public data and there's increasingly understood benchmarks of what good looks like for first-party spend as a share of total spend. The second reason it's important is because it isolates out other factors that influence game performance from web shop performance. So if you're trying to analyze web shops as a product, this one isolates out game performance, seasonality, et cetera. And then the third reason is because it's the thing that if you shift, it has the highest impact. So that's what this sensitivity table shows you. This table shows what happens if you move in increments of 2.5% in terms of reducing your payment processing fees or increasing or reducing your share of channel. And if you look there, it is worthwhile to increase your costs by 10%, going from 2.5% to 12.5% in payment processing fees, if you can increase your share of spend by 2.5%, because it's just so much more impactful. Similarly, if you start at 10% processing fees with 20% spend, if you increase your share of channel for a $100 million game by 2.5%, you're adding 2.3 million. Whereas if you decrease the costs by 2.5%, the impact is more like $500,000. So in terms of what you want to move with your web shop, it's this number. But the way we'll run through kind of understanding what's driving that number is each step in a user journey. So we'll run through each step, and then each step has a kind of commensurate metric, top-line metric, that kind of combined really are what drive your store revenue. So this is the equation, one equation to get at store revenue, broken down by step. And then the way I think about this kind of concept is as a diagnostic tool. So you can drill down to understand your web shop performance by looking in deeper and deeper layers at these numbers, and you're looking at one aspect of your product and your player experience. So each of these metrics has supporting metrics that give you a bit more nuance. So if something's changing in my web shop performance, I would first look at, okay, well, what's changing? Number of customers or LTV? And then continue to drill down until I get to the root cause. So we'll be running through each of these steps, the top line metrics, the supporting metrics, and how to optimize them. So first step is first visit. This is obviously hugely important because it determines anything later that comes is going to be reliant on this being large and high quality. Say people over-index on quantity here and overlook quality. It doesn't just matter how many users you're getting, it matters which they are. That's especially true for web shops, which require your users to like play the game. So the top line metric of quantity kind of speaks for itself. But what I would say is like essential to understand here is that you have quantity, quality, and then it's also important to note that like where your users are coming from influences their experience of your game web shop, because if they're coming from a trusted source, they come in with a different first impression. And so similarly, this becomes like one of the best ways to filter your metrics. But in terms of looking at like the kind of like more nuanced metrics here, I would highlight bounce rate and traffic sources as the two most important like underlying metrics underneath total visits. Bounce rate is important because it tells you what your like first experience of your shop is. If you think about players arrive at the shop, you want to give them like a compelling reason to link their accounts, which is the next step. You want to give them like an easy experience doing that and like an overall understanding of the shop's value prop. So bounce rate just tracks how many of your users did nothing else, just landed at your site and then exited. If that number's high, you can solve it by enhancing your value proposition or making it less like frictionful to take the next step. And then the other aspect of your first visits is like site traffic. As I mentioned, this is like really essential as a filter downstream, but also because if you're coming from, for example, like an in-game link to the web shop, you have a very different impression of it than if you're clicking a Facebook approach, just in terms of trust and safety. So being able to understand how your shop is appearing to different player types that are coming at it in different ways is really important for explaining metrics later. How do you increase this? Obviously, there are kind of like obvious ways to grow total visits, but I'll highlight a couple here that are really important. So one is using what you can in-game to link out to your web shop. Now, everyone knows there are various things you can't do, but you are actually allowed to link out to anything that isn't like a transaction-related functionality. So a bunch of product stash builds are like products specifically designed to be compliant with App Store policies that you can link out from and to get them into your web environment. Like loyalty is a really good example of that. The other thing you want to make sure of is like trust is something you need to establish up front. So making the shop look familiar, feel familiar, that would increase the percentage of users that are taking further actions and kind of trust this experience. So it's a way to decrease your bounce rate. And then, third, you want to identify kind of untapped sources of users and go after them by looking at your sources of traffic and then, using creative partnerships, et cetera. So once you've kind of got users to trust your site, they visited, the next really important thing is account linking. And like one of the reasons this is so important is because it basically establishes a prerequisite for doing a lot of downstream user experiences require you to know who that user is because you want to personalize them. So this is a really high source of friction, obviously. And one of the reasons it's so high friction is because very few players on mobile games even have like a concept of a multi-device engagement with your game. They've probably only ever engaged with your game from the game client on that device. So this is the first time they'll have like a cross-platform experience. So they won't know their password, they won't remember setting up an account. So the key is to make it like as low friction as possible and as motivated as possible. So, account linking conversion is pretty obvious how you calculate it, but we break it down into like account linking initiation, how many people start the process, link their account, and then how many people complete that process. And what that captures is initiation rate kind of captures like how attractive is my value proposition to motivate players to link their accounts. And then assuming they try, like how many are successful in doing that, that's more of like an implementation question than like an attractiveness or motivation question. So commensurately, like a lot of the things you can do to improve these rates, the first one, like initiation rate, is really a design question. Can you design your value proposition to be more compelling so that people immediately understand that they would get value from this experience? And then can you make the kind of like ease of use as low friction as possible and your like authentication technology work as seamlessly as possible to make sure those that try to link their account succeed in doing so. For example, these are some Stash web shops always offer like passwordless logins, so using QR codes or deep links on mobile. And then similarly, like being very clear about what the value of this shop is for players so that they kind of understand what's going on here, what the deal is. Okay, so you've got players to link your account, and now you want to get them to make the first purchase. Again, like this also breaks down into what I would call a kind of like motivation question versus an implementation question. So at Stash, we use a cart, so you can purchase multiple products at once. Even if you don't, though, you want to look at how many users like made the attempt to make a purchase? So how many did you successfully convince, like, this is a worthwhile channel for you to use? And then separate that out from like checkout abandonment, which is more a question of how smooth is your kind of like design and how low friction is it, how well do your payment methods work, et cetera. So add to cart is really essential because it is one of the highest drop-off rates. We actually find the drop-off from added to cart to purchase completion is pretty low. If you can convince players to make a purchase on the web, most of them will go and do it. They'll find out how. But it's really more about like, this is obviously a very high friction channel for your players. So can you create like a incentive that gets them to, do this high friction thing? So that's often commercial incentives like discounts, using the additional margin you have to like share some of that value. But it could also be like other design incentives or design rewards to like proceeding along this flow. The second part is like checkout abandonment. And what you're trying to do here is make it like as easy and accessible for players to purchase as possible. So this could be a function of how many payment methods you offer, but it could also be about reducing clicks in the checkout flow or introducing like additional incentives at the checkout flow to motivate them to complete the conversion. So for example, if you look at number 4 here, that is kind of checkout-based incentives to convert, like discounts or reminders of the value you're getting them. Other ways to like increase your add to cart rate that are really, really important are providing a good catalog. Like a bunch of stores fail simply because they just don't sell products that people want to buy. So that's one of the reasons Stash is like so emphatic about having a unified catalog, because it enables you to sell all of the offers from within your game in your web environment, and therefore like sell the high conversion ones. Other ways that you can drive these metrics up are like running a loyalty program, for example. That's kind of an obvious one. Or like using other web kind of native discount formats. Sorry, I'm just gonna have a drink. All right, so next is like the final step, which is really kind of a catch-all for just like, are you making this a recurring experience that your players want to undertake? So assuming you've converted a player, you then need to make sure they continue to spend in this channel. And a bit like some of the other metrics, like this kind of breaks down into a, how motivated are they to make this purchase and how easy is it. So the number one driver of repeat purchases is going to be the quantity of purchases. You could also break this down into like repeat visit rate. So the question you want to understand is like, do players like have this in their mindset so that they know to come back to the store? And that's a function of how are you messaging them, retargeting them, how well designed is your like reward schema so that they associate this with high value. And then there's like a question of once you get them back into the store, which you can also do through engagement mechanics. Like often you want to create a web environment that goes beyond just the base commercial functionality, so players have a regular reason to go there for updates or community features or new content you're releasing. Once you brought them back into that environment, like how good is your kind of on-site messaging to convert them. That's a lot of stuff that like will also drive your first purchase conversion. So really the most important driver here is definitely like repeat visit rate. So how do you boost this? Well, one is like, use a plethora of messaging formats to continuously remind them about this channel. Like absolutely no store is going to be so good that every player remembers it all the time. So you always want to have, interruptions into their sales flow that like brings players back into this environment. One way we've found of doing this is like, through using loyalty programs and other kind of web in-game engagement-based like mechanics that mean you can actually insert messaging about your web shop into your gameplay loop. So our loyalty programs are like specifically designed to have a flow, a link out flow that is compliant for being in the game. And all that you need to do that is like detach that loyalty bonus claiming from motivating them to make a purchase in the web. Another way you can kind of boost this number is just by like being quite aggressive with how you're messaging this to players. One of the great benefits of D2C is that you get actual player identity data and like out of app channels through which you can message them. That could be email. There are also great companies like Dynamo is a really cool business that does like direct messaging to like VIPs on Facebook. So a lot of those kind of community tools that developers are already using to re-engage players or retarget lapsed players can be like redirected to driving them into your web shop. Similarly, like creator codes is another great way to do that. All right, so that's kind of like the end-to-end flow. So I'll wrap up in a second here by just saying, like, I would always try and think about kind of your user's journey when you think about your product performance, and then figure out what aspect of the user journey is failing. Is it like a motivation question? Do they not buy the value proposition? Or is it like an implementation functionality question? Is it not well designed or usable? I would step through each of these and try and like identify where you are maybe lagging or overperforming competitors, also to diagnose any like separate changes. Yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying, like, at Stash, we operate Stash like so it's auto-optimizing. It kind of like does this on behalf of developers. So we have a pretty sophisticated suite of like analytics and metrics that don't exist within game developers, because game developers don't operate standalone e-commerce channels. So you kind of need to stand up an analytics infrastructure that looks at this as like a conventional e-commerce funnel and flow, which is a little bit different from in-game monetization, which is really done by interrupting the flow of gameplay with kind of purchase prompts. Oh, you ran out of energy. Here's a reason you should purchase. In the browsing environment, like, users are actually browsing to make a purchase. So you need to create what is functionally an e-commerce experience to enable them to browse, to think about value, to plan their purchases, and then give them like some reason to make that purchase sustainably outside of the game environment. And while doing that, like, while minimizing as many discounts as you functionally give, because you obviously don't want to give away all of that additionally captured margin. So if any of you kind of want to talk more about this or want to find out more about Stash, always around and like love talking about this stuff. Pretty metrics heavy presentation, but happy to share it with anyone after. So thank you guys very much.